Hey everyone, Andrew back again and welcome to another video, and today I'm here to do my thread response to Ron Haggerty, my 5 overrated albums and my 5 underrated albums. So really cool thread, and a few other people have been getting on board with this, which is great because I really enjoy these type of videos where people talk about underrated and overrated albums. I find it very interesting to see other people's opinions, and that's really all it is, guys. It's different opinions, so please keep in mind while watching this video, because I can pretty much guarantee you guys there's some overrated albums that I will be talking about that you probably won't agree with, but that's cool. We all have different opinions, and that's what these sort of videos are all about. So this is all in fun. I'm not having a go at anyone, just my opinions. So yeah, Ron Haggerty started this thread, and I'm relatively new to his channel, but I will be leaving a link to his YouTube channel in the description box below, so please check him out. Anyway, let's get on to it. So I'm going to do things kind of different. Ron did one overrated and then one underrated album back to back. I'm going to do my 5 underrated ones first and then move on to the overrated ones at the end. Now there's a few albums that I do not own within this video, so I will be throwing a quick picture of the album cover on screen. Obviously I've listened to the albums, of course, but I just do not own them. Alrighty, so to kick things off, we'll do my 5 underrated albums first. So first up is one I do not own, and that is Exhumer's Possessed by Fire. This is their debut thrash album, and not only is this album extremely underrated, I think it's a absolutely brilliant debut album. Very heavy and extremely fast paced. It's just a well done thrash album in my opinion, but I feel this band overall is pretty underrated. I never really hear anyone ever really talk about them, and it's a shame because I think they are a really good thrash band. So yeah, choice number 1 for underrated is Exhumer's Possessed by Fire. Moving on, next is White Wizard, The Devil's Cut. Now I can kind of see why these guys are a little bit underrated. They're a modern traditional heavy metal band, and I know people have their own opinions on modern metal, but these guys are absolutely fantastic, and this album is the latest album, and it's just absolutely brilliant. If you're a fan of 80s Iron Maiden, do yourself a favour and check these guys out. In my opinion, one of the better modern traditional metal bands out there. So that's White Wizard, The Devil's Cut. Next up, we have Ozzy Osbourne's No More Tears, and I think Ozzy is a great artist. He's one of my favourite solo artists, and he's got a very large discography, as everyone knows. And No More Tears, I think, is extremely underrated. I think this album gets overlooked. A lot of people tend to praise a lot of his early 80s stuff, which is really good, but I think No More Tears is extremely underrated. It's actually my favourite Ozzy album. I just think it's absolutely fantastic, and yeah, pretty underrated in his discography. Next up is a Testament album, The Gathering, and I think this is extremely underrated. Everyone tends to only really talk about Testament's earlier albums from the 80s and the early 90s, and then of course their comeback albums in the late 2000s, but I don't really hear too many people ever talk about this album, perhaps for the sake that it is extremely hard to get. But a little bit of info in regards to this album: Nuclear Blast are re-releasing this along with Demonic on CD and vinyl in November, so that's a little bit of news and info for you guys out there. But yeah, The Gathering is absolutely fantastic. It's a very heavy album, and vocally it's amazing. So yeah, I definitely think this is pretty underrated next to most of other Testament's discography, really. And the last one that I am going to talk about, I own on vinyl, and it is Saxon Dogs of War, one of my favourite, if not my favourite Saxon album. Now again, this band in general is extremely underrated in my opinion, and I can kind of see why a few people may not have stuck this band out. Their earlier albums are kind of inconsistent, you know, they have a very, very different style and sound during the 80s. But I think from the early to mid 90s up until now is when this band really found their feet. They've got a very, very consistent and heavy sound over this era, and yeah, just absolutely fantastic. So Dogs of War is an amazing album from Saxon, and yeah, another extremely underrated band. So that's that one. Alrighty, now this is where the fun really begins, and we're going to talk about my 5 overrated albums. So please keep in mind, as I said at the beginning of the video, this is just my opinion. I am not trying to offend or upset anyone here. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, and we'll get on to the overrated albums. So we'll kind of work slowly, and then we'll work my way to the top. So first up, we have a Testament album, The New Order. And this may be a surprise to some of you who have been following me recently, because you guys know how much I love Testament. And don't get me wrong, this is a really, really good album, but I do think it's really overrated. People tend to rank this one extremely high, and a lot of people I've heard say this is their favourite or the best Testament album. I don't really agree. I think it's a pretty weak follow-up to The Legacy, which is just absolutely amazing in my opinion. And the next album, Practice What You Preach, I think is a lot better than The New Order. As I said, this is a good album, but I do think it's pretty overrated. Alrighty, next up is an album that I do not own, and Brett, if you're watching this video, I do apologise in advance, but I'm going to have to mention AC/DC's Back in Black. I honestly do not get the hype surrounding this album. It seems to be everyone's, or the majority of AC/DC fans' top album, or at least up there with their favourite albums, and I just don't get it. I don't really get the appeal to this album whatsoever. In fact, I'm not really a big AC/DC fan whatsoever, which may sound kind of strange to you guys considering I live in Australia and they are a Australian band, but I don't know, I just can't get into their sound. I'm not a big blues fan, and yeah, I'm just not a fan of AC/DC in general, but definitely I think the Back in Black album is extremely overrated. Next up, we have this album right here, Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. Oh my god, is this overrated. Now this is a good album, and I've got to say I used to absolutely love the shit out of this album, but I was listening to it the other day and I thought, my god, this really is an overrated album. Not much more to say about this album. I certainly don't really think it's as good as I used to think it was, and yeah, pretty overrated. Next up, we have Megadeth's Rust in Peace, and like Appetite for Destruction, this was an album that I used to think was really, really good, but after listening to Peace Sells and the other two earlier Megadeth albums, I don't know, I just think this is a very, very overrated album. It's not as good as I used to think it was upon re-listening to it recently, and yeah, I just do not get the hype around this album whatsoever. Everyone seems to rank this as the favourite best Megadeth album, and yeah, it's certainly not in my opinion. Yeah, very, very overrated. Alrighty, so what is it? What do I consider to be the most overrated album of all time? And that is Metallica, Master of Puppets. So initially I was going to do Kill 'Em All because I do own it, and I do not like that album. But Master of Puppets I think is a little bit more overrated than Kill 'Em All. Everyone seems to rank that as the favourite or best Metallica album ever, and yeah, to me it's just extremely overrated. I do not get the appeal of that album whatsoever. I have listened to it, I've listened to the whole album fully online, and yeah, I don't know, very, very overrated. I think the main issue that I have with this album, and kind of Metallica in general really, I don't really like Metallica apart from one album. I think as a band they are extremely overrated. But anyway, back to Master of Puppets thing. The songs to me are just way too drawn out, and they take way too long to actually get into the meat and potatoes of the songs. There's a lot of sort of songs that are kind of on the longer side on this album, and yeah, I just find them way too drawn out, especially at the beginning of each song, and I just do not get the appeal whatsoever to Master of Puppets. I just don't get it. Extremely overrated, and that is why it's on this list. Alrighty, so that does it for my top 5 overrated and underrated albums. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully I haven't offended or upset too many people with my opinions, but as I said, just my opinion, and this was all really in fun. I wasn't really having a go at anyone. If you happen to like some of the overrated albums that I mentioned. And also, once again, before I sign off, if you're not subscribed to Ron Haggerty, please do so. His channel link will be left in the description box below. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.